Hi everybody, and thanks for tuning in. The reason I'm making this video is because I wanted to support my contention that Joel Osteen and many other preachers just yank verses out of the Bible completely out of context to try and use them to support their sermon, whatever it may be about, whatever philosophy it's about. But really is completely different than what obviously the intended meaning and the intended point of the Bible verse was. And so, because I was challenged, this is kind of a never-ending thing about Osteen because he's so well-liked, but I was challenged to look at more of his recent stuff and see how he was doing. And so I went to his website. Here it is. You can see one of the first things that pops up when you go to watch his sermon is they make it as easy as possible to give money. There's some select. You can see the $125 button is selected. You could click there and get the PayPal, and boy, you could just send him that money just like that. And that's sort of the main thing, obviously, here on the page. But aside from that, I was watching the video, and it's a positive, kind of a positive thinking speech, but it just 2.5 minutes in, his very first verse that he uses is used completely out of context, and I'm going to show you that, I hope, if you will. But I'm not going to go through the whole sermon verse by verse or anything, because I think it proves my point that if his very first verse that he uses is out of context, well, yes, he does use verses out of context, and many of them do. But here we go. Like I said, it started about 2.5. That's Huckleberry. It started about 2.5 minutes in. So let's see what we get here. This is a second take because it had technical difficulty. Oh, here you go.
Micah said, "Rejoice not over me, my enemies, when I fall, for I shall arise." He wasn't complaining about the trouble. He wasn't discouraged over being knocked down. He understood this principle, that there was bounce back in his spirit. In the middle of the difficulty, he was speaking victory. If you're going to come out of that challenge, you have to do like Micah. This problem didn't come to stay, it came to pass. God being for me is more than the world being against me. I shall arise. When you say that, forces of darkness tremble. When you declare, I shall arise, angels go to work. No more, it's never going to change. My business will never make it. My child's never going to get back on course. Zip that up. If you talk defeat, you're going to have defeat. Say with Micah, yes, I've had difficulties. I'm not denying the problem, not acting like it doesn't exist. All I'm saying is I'm not staying here. I shall arise.
Okay. Just stop there. And that's mostly what he says about Micah. Now, from just what he's saying, you would assume that what the story is that, Micah's down in the dumps, Micah's in trouble, and he's down and out. But he declares, with his positive attitude that I shall arise, and he is victorious, and he's victorious against the forces against him, or whatever. Isn't that kind of what he's saying? Now let's listen a little bit. Let's listen again and see if that's what he's saying. That Micah's, this is what the story's about. That Micah is bummed out or whatever, is in trouble or something, and he's saying, I will arise, and he's using his positive attitude, and his faith in God to come out of his trouble, right? All right, let's listen one more time real quick.
Micah said, "Rejoice not over me, my enemies, when I fall, for I shall arise." He wasn't complaining about the trouble. He wasn't discouraged over being knocked down. He understood this principle, that there was bounce back in his spirit. In the middle of the difficulty, he was speaking victory. If you're going to come out of that challenge, you have to do like Micah. This problem didn't come to stay, it came to pass. God being for me is more than the world being against me. I shall arise. When you say...
Okay, so Micah had bounce back in his spirit. That's what this verse is about. All right, well, let's go to Micah. And you know, although I'm just focusing in really on this verse, we're going to have to look at the whole book of Micah, which is only 7 chapters, by the way, to get the full context. And so I'm going to just give you a quick rundown about the whole book of Micah. Just going to skim through the first 5 chapters, look a little more closely at the 6th chapter as we lead into the 7th chapter where the verse is that Joel used. So here we are. Now let me just say that I'm just going to give you the whole book of Micah kind of nutshell version real quick. And it's kind of ironic that he would use Micah as sort of a positive thinking message, because Micah's really hardcore and not a real he's kind of down on things. But anyway, okay, in a nutshell, here's what happens in the book of Micah. Now he just talks about, he's a prophet, and he just talks about how Israel has become so depraved and so sinful and so terrible, and is worshiping foreign gods, and it's just so horrible, it's disgusting, and it's just horrifying. And they go through lists of all the terrible things that are going on there. About 4 times it tells this story. And then what happens is he says that Jerusalem and Israel, all of Israel, including Jerusalem, is going to be completely wiped out, obliterated. And he's real specific about all the different parts of Israel, including Samaria. Everything's going to be completely wiped out. But, now after that being most of it, but Israel will be redeemed at the end of time. At the very end of time, Israel will be redeemed. So he tells that story in a horrifying ways, about 4 times over before he comes to the verse that Joel used. Now, the point I'm making here is this story is about Israel. It's about the destruction of Israel for sin and judgment on Israel, and its latter, redemption at the end of time. And so it really has almost nothing to do with Micah, the book of Micah. There's no narrative part. It never says anything like Micah went down to Jerusalem or he was talking with so-and-so or anything. It has none of that in there. Barely mentions Micah himself at all in the whole thing. So it's this book is not about Micah. Now Micah's the one speaking it, but it's about the fall of Jerusalem. Also, the way the book is structured is that Micah speaks sort of in the voice of God, and he speaks in his own voice, and he also speaks in the voice of Israel. And so this is sort of a literary device that he uses really to try and be more dramatic and more emotional, as he speaks as if he's Israel speaking, also speaks as God, and he speaks as his own voice from what he's been revealed by God. So let's take a quick look, starting with chapter 1, of course. You can see here, we're just going to skim through, but you can see by the subtitles here that judgment against Samaria and Jerusalem. Even though this is the NIV, they're pretty much on board with what I'm saying as far as the interpretation of this chapter and what it's about. Okay, so you're going to look down there. Therefore I will make Samaria a heap of rubble, a place for planting vineyards. Further on, there's weeping and mourning, and it's just a total disaster down there. It says finally at the end of this verse, you might as well just shave your head now, because your children are going to be carried off into exile. Right? It's terrible. Terrible, terrible. 2nd chapter, well, woe to those who plan iniquity. So we got more woe coming out, and it's just people covet fields. I will give you over to ruin, and your people to derision. You will bear the scorn of all the nations. Not a real positive reinforcement type speaker there, is he? He's not saying, if you change your ways, that ain't going to happen. He's saying, this is coming. This is coming. All right, finally, to chapter 7. Israel's misery is the title, the subtitle here. Again, it's about Israel's misery. This is not about Micah having a bad day. This is Israel, him speaking. Okay, we're going to break this up here. This is him speaking on behalf of the people of Israel. Whose misery? Israel's misery. What misery is mine? I'm like one who gathers summer fruit at the gleaning of the vineyard. And on and on. it tells about Israel's misery and how horrible things are. Down to verse 7. Well, you see there's a break here at verse 7. Now it talks about don't trust a neighbor. It's talking about neighboring countries. Even with the woman who lies in your embrace. So that could be the United States. Even the most friendly countries, you can't trust them in the end times. They will turn against Israel. And then that brings us to verse 7. And now this is when Micah is speaking for himself now. And it's pretty clear there. He says, but as for me, and then, like I said, there's a break right there. And so the editor of the NIV recognized this. But as for me, I watch in hope for the Lord. I wait for God, my Savior. My God will hear me. Again, we're moving into redemption. Okay, look at the subtitle there. Israel will rise. Who's rising? Who's rising up? Is it Micah that's rising up? Or is it Israel that's rising up here? Okay, again, now he's speaking. I can see where there would be some confusion there. But he's speaking as the voice of the people of Israel again. Do not gloat over me, my enemy. Though I have fallen, I will rise. Though I, Israel, sit in darkness, the Lord will be my light. Because I, and again, Israel, have sinned against him. I will bear the Lord's wrath until he pleads my case. Remember, we were just looking at that. And here in the Wycliffe commentary about chapter 7, it says, this concluding chapter completes Jehovah's lawsuit with Israel, begun in chapter 6. The section is broken in thought, which suggests that what deep emotion Micah voices the reply of the people, their confession and lamentation. So Micah is voicing the people. And it's the same case as we saw in chapter 6 against who? The nation of Israel. So you can see this is the verse that Micah used was, I have fallen, though I have fallen, I will rise. And he made it sound like it was Micah. It was like, get that bounce back principle. And he bounced back. Micah did. This has nothing to do with Micah. It's Micah speaking, but it's not about himself. It's about the nation of Israel. And so it does not apply in the way Joel was trying to use it in his sermon. He just picked a verse that sounded good, though I have fallen, I will rise, and just used it when that verse has nothing to do with Micah. Again, he's trying to make it sound like Micah was in trouble, and Micah called on the Lord and had faith in the Lord and positive thinking, and he defeated adversity or whatever by rising.
Micah said, rejoice not over me, my enemies. When I fall, for I shall arise. He wasn't complaining about the trouble. He wasn't discouraged over being knocked down. He understood this principle, that there was bounce back in his spirit. In the middle of the difficulty, he was speaking victory. If you're going to come out of that challenge, you have to do like Micah. This problem didn't come to stay, it came to pass. God being for me is more than the world being against me. I shall arise.
But that is not the story. This is simply the redemption. This is about the redemption of Israel at the end of time. At the end of time. Not Micah. Micah's just telling the story. It's I'm not going to try and refute Joel's whole ministry or whatever, but it's clear that he just comes up with an idea and then just finds verses that kind of jams them in there that originally don't mean what he's trying to say with them. Later on in this sermon, he talks about Joseph and how Joseph, had that bounce back principle. But really, to me, the story of Joseph is the story of Jesus, who was in the pit for 3 days and rose to become king. So that's, to me, the point of the story of Joseph, not the bounce back principle. And so, anyway, it's up, you decide. I'm just a guy with good reading comprehension. What can I say? Thanks.